introduction, and thank you for having us here tonight. It's a great place you got. So I'm running for governor, and let me just tell you a little bit about my background. I was born in South Dakota, and my parents were from Illinois. Both grew up on farms, and my father got out of the service and then college. He took a job where he moved some, and so I lived in different places in the Midwest, and then we finally ended up, when I was in 6th grade or so, in a small town in Massachusetts named Gardner, which is about 60 miles west of Boston by the New Hampshire border. It's a small factory city that made furniture, made chairs. Its nickname was Chairtown. And it would, if you have an alumni chair, it was probably made there. And so that business, when I was a kid during the 70s, late 60s, was kind of declining. This town was 17,000 or so, and it's smaller now. A lot of those businesses have closed. But we had the world's largest chair in front of my high school. The whole area had different small towns that had factories, and so I was able to work my way through college by working in a paper mill in a place called Otter River, Massachusetts, which would be hard to find that on a map, but it was a great job where I benefited from being able to work. It was 7 days a week, but the great thing about that was it was double time on Saturdays and time and a half on Saturday, double time on Sunday. But it allowed me to pay for college, and I went to school in New York City. And when I got out of, when I was about to graduate, I wanted to be a lawyer. That's what the world needs, is more lawyers. And there were fewer back in those days. And so I was encouraged to apply to Vanderbilt. And so I applied to Vanderbilt, and when I got in, I decided that's where I was going to go. And so in 1978, I moved to Nashville. And when I got to Nashville, I started law school, and after a bit, I met a woman who was a Nashville native and was in my law school class, and she was very much more accomplished than I was and smarter than me. But we fell in love, and we had this 2-year argument about where we're going to live when we graduated, whether we're going to live in Chairtown or growing progressive Nashville. And I live in Nashville, which is the first of many failures I've had as an advocate. But it was a great thing for me and for our family. We're able to raise 3 kids. We have 2 daughters who will graduate from college this year. My son is a lawyer in Nashville. And Ann and I were both able to have careers. It's a great place to live. And Tennessee and Nashville are our homes. And so I went to work after law school at the public defender's office. I started there and loved the work. I found it really meaningful. I felt that every day I was doing something that to me seemed very important, and that I was helping people. Whether it was giving people their day in court, doing your best to represent them, or whether it was helping people try to find an answer to the problems in their life, whether it's alcohol or drug addiction, helping people with mental health issues. Those things all were very fulfilling for me. In 1990, I ran for public defender and was reelected in 94 and 98. And then in 99, Bill Purcell, who was an assistant public defender with me back in the 80s, got elected mayor. And he asked me to become the city's attorney, to become the director of law for Nashville. And that job is interesting because you're really involved in the day-to-day activities of the city, and you kind of understand it in a whole different way. And so I took that job. And then as we got to early 2007, Bill was not running for re-election. And I thought there were some things that I wanted to do for the city, things that I thought that we could help move Nashville forward, and I decided I wanted to run for mayor. And I think I was getting close to turning 50, and so I felt, if I lose, my ego will be hurt for a couple weeks, but if I don't run, I'll regret it the rest of my life. And so I made the jump and I ran. And one of the things that sort of brought it all home to me, sort of the challenge of this was, I got in the race in January, the election was in August, I was the last candidate in, there was maybe 5 or 6 candidates. And there was a poll done by a local newspaper that no longer exists called the City Paper. And the poll was just one of these not unscientific. You just go online and vote as many times as you want. But the poll comes out, and I am dead last. And worse than dead last, I'm at about 2 or 3% in the polls in terms of name recognition and support. And so one morning after that poll came out, I came down for breakfast, and my wife was there with my middle child, Frances, a daughter who was probably around 14. And so I'm talking to Ann about the poll, and I look over at Frances, and she's getting this real concerned look on her face. And she comes over to me and she says, Dad, you still have time to get out. You can still get out of this. But I hung in there, and I was elected mayor and took office in September of '07. And when I took office, Nashville was in good shape. It was moving forward, and good things were happening. The first big challenge I had to handle as mayor was sort of dealing with the Nashville Predators were then going through a process where they were being sold. And the lead buyer at that point was a guy who wanted to move the team either to Kansas City or Hamilton, Ontario. And there was a big effort to get local owners to buy the team, and then we had to work through all the lease agreements, but we kept the team in Nashville. And it's kind of ironical now, back in '07, what we were really worried about is whether the attendance would get up to a point where it would really work. And now you can't get tickets, and obviously after the Stanley Cup run we had this year, it's a pretty solid team in Nashville, Tennessee, playing hockey. But of course, about 8 months into my first term, we had a change in our economy. We had the Great Recession, the worst turn down since the Depression. And that changed everything. Immediately things stopped. You had, construction stopped. Projects that people were talking about doing didn't happen. Unemployment went up to 9% or above. And we had to make changes in the budget. We had to manage the city in a fiscally responsible way. We had to make sure the budget was balanced. And so we had to make cuts. And so this process of making cuts, I was guided by the priorities I ran on and what I believed is important for the city, which is public education, public safety, and economic development and opportunity. So we cut almost every department 15 to 20%, but we didn't cut schools, and we didn't cut public safety. I mean, they had to tighten their belts, but we actually tried to add things there. And then in 2010, we had the flood in Nashville, which was probably the worst natural disaster we had in 75 years. A couple of $1 billion of damage to private property and hundreds of millions to public property. And the story of that, though, will always be that the way the people in Nashville responded to it. They stepped up so well to help their neighbors, to help strangers. The week after the flood, we had probably 20,000, 25,000 people volunteering to get Nashville back up on its feet. So that was, in many ways, we came out of that stronger, but I would never want to go through that again, and hope that nobody else would have to. We remained aggressive about economic development. That during the depths of the